Today we're going to be learning about the comparative and superlative in German. In English, we frequently use the adjective ending er to compare people or things, like when we say taller than, nicer than, or larger than. This form of the adjective is known as the comparative form. Similarly, we use the adjective ending est or st, like the kindest, the prettiest, to express the superlative form in English. German comparatives and superlatives use these same endings. However, English uses more and most with adjectives longer than 2 syllables, but German continues to use the er and est or st endings for all adjectives regardless of their length. We have a few steps for figuring out how to form the comparative and superlative adjectives in German. So we're going to go over these steps now. The two things that we need to do when forming a comparative adjective are we take our adjective and then we add umlauts if it is a single syllable, single vowel, a, o, or u. And then the second step is we add an er ending. So let's try this out with a few different examples. Here we have a few adjectives: nett, klug, billig, interessant, and schlau. Let's follow those steps to form the comparative forms of each of these. Nett is 1 syllable. Does it have 1 vowel? Yes. Is that vowel a, o, or u? No. So we can't add umlauts to it. So all we do is we add an er ending and we get netter. Klug, is that 1 syllable? Yes. Does it have 1 vowel, a, o, or u? Yes. So we just add an er ending onto it and umlauts, and we get klüger. Billig, is that 1 syllable? No. So we're not adding umlauts here. And then we just add an er ending and we get billiger. Interessant, is that 1 syllable? No. So we just add an er and we get interessanter. Schlau, is that 1 syllable? Yes. Does it have a single a, o, or u vowel? It has an a, it has a u, but it's not just one of those. It's actually a diphthong there, so we do not add umlauts to it. We just add an er. Okay, so those were some examples of forming comparative adjectives in German. Now we actually have a third step if a noun comes after our comparative adjective. So if you have a noun that adjective describes that follows it, you also have to add the correct adjective ending. We have to look at our adjective endings chart to do this. So if we wanted to say something like the nicer boy, you would say der netter, and we look on our chart here, nominative, masculine, der netter, and we notice we take an e ending, der nettere Junge. Or if you wanted to say something like the interesting book, we know it's das Buch, or more interesting book, that would be das interessanter Buch. If we said a more interesting book, that would be ein interessanteres Buch. So we always kind of have to reference our adjective endings chart if we need to include an adjective ending on our comparative adjective. So let's take a look at some examples. Deine Haare sind länger. Your hair is longer, or your hairs are longer. This one doesn't have an adjective ending. It is just the comparative form. So we get lang. We add umlauts because it's a single syllable, single a, o, or u vowel. And then we add our er. Deine Haare sind länger. In the other example that I have here, ich will das schärfere Messer haben, we notice that there is a noun that follows that comparative form. I want to have the sharper knife. The knife follows that. So since it is describing a noun, we have to add our adjective ending, and that is an e. So it's schärfer, and then we add the ending onto it. All right, let's move on to superlative adjectives now. Okay, so we have 3 steps for forming a superlative adjective. Now, it depends upon what form of that superlative adjective we are using and the context that it is in as to what that third step will be. But the first step is actually the same as the first step for forming a comparative adjective, and that is that we add umlauts if it is a single syllable, single vowel, a, o, or u. The second step is a little bit different here, though. We add an est ending if our adjective ends in an s, t, d, or z. And if it doesn't, then we add just an st ending. If it ends in any other letter, it's just an st ending that goes on to that. Now, with superlatives, we can't have that stand alone the way that we can with a comparative. There will always be an adjective ending that is on it with the superlative. You can say the knife is sharper, but if you say that is the sharpest, it still has an adjective ending in German. If you say it's the sharpest knife, then it has a noun that follows it. So no matter what, there will be an ending that comes after this. If you want to say that it's the sharpest of all, or the nicest of all, I call that the superlative. And all we do is we take that form, that superlative form that we just did, and we add am before it, the word am, and at the end of that superlative form, we add the ending en. So that would be like am besten, am meisten, am schärfsten, am größten. But if we're not using the superlative and a noun comes after it, then we also need to add the correct adjective ending. Before we practice with the adjective endings and looking at our examples, I want to make sure that we can do the forms of the superlative by looking at a regular adjective just the way we did with the comparatives. So, net is one syllable. It does not contain a single A, O, or U, so we can't add umlauts to it. It does end in an S, T, D, or Z ending. So that means that we have that filler E. So we'll write nettest. Now you will never just see nettest in German. You'll always see an ending on it. So if I say der netteste Junge, there's an E ending on it. If I say the boy is the nicest of all, then we use that the superlative. We change this to am nettesten. And most of the time, whenever I form this comparative form, I'll put a little dash there to remind us that we do have to have an adjective ending that will come after it. It's not finished after we come up with that superlative form. Let's take a look at the next one. We have klug. It is a single syllable. It has a single A, O, or U. So we add umlauts to this one and we get klügst. And if we want to come up with what the superlative, the most clever, the smartest of all, that would be am klügsten. Billig is two syllables, so no umlauts, and it does not end in an S, a T, a D, or a Z, so it just ends in an ST. So we get billigst. And then am billigsten. Interessant, more than one syllable, and it ends in an S, T, D, or Z, so it's going to be interessantest, and then am interessantesten. And then with schlau, that is one syllable, but it has both an A and a U, not a single vowel. So we don't add umlauts, and we get schlau. Does it end in an S, T, D, or Z? No, so it's just schlaust, and then am schlausten. All right, let's get back to our examples. Der schnellste Schwimmer gewinnt. The fastest swimmer wins. So we see that there's a noun that comes after it, swimmer, that fastest is describing. So we have to figure out that ending by looking at our adjective endings chart. So we have that here. We see der, and then schnellste, and that's how we figure out what the ending is on our superlative form. Then the next example, we have der Schwimmer ist am schnellsten. The swimmer is the fastest. That's using the superlative, the fastest of all. So we just add that am word before and then the en ending onto our superlative form. Here are two other examples. Sie kauft das billigste Buch. She buys the cheapest book. So this one has an adjective ending. If you want to say the book is the cheapest of all, das Buch ist am billigsten. So we have to add the am and the en ending. On this next page, we have several examples of how adjectives will look in the comparative, superlative, and the superlative forms. So we have net, which becomes netter, nettest, am nettesten. Schön becomes schöner, schönst, am schönsten. Jung is jünger, jüngst, am jüngsten. Alt is älter, ältest, am ältesten. Reich is reicher, reichst, am reichsten. Arm is ärmer, ärmst, am ärmsten. Traurig is trauriger, traurigst, am traurigsten. Windig is windiger, windigst, am windigsten. Faul is fauler, faulst, am faulsten. Neu is neuer, neuest, am neuesten. Kalt is kälter, kältest, am kältesten. Warm is wärmer, wärmst, am wärmsten. Dumm is dümmer, dümmst, am dümmsten. And sonnig is sonniger, sonnigst, am sonnigsten. Now we do have some rule breakers. I have them down below here. Expensive is teuer, teurer, teuerst, am teuersten. What is kind of funny about this is the comparative form here. We drop that E in there. It's not teurer, it's teurer. And then dark kind of does the same thing. Dunkel, it drops that E and it becomes dunkler. And then we move on to hoch, höher, höchst, am höchsten. So in that comparative form also, it drops the C. And then we have nah, näher, nächst, am nächsten. So this kind of is the opposite here. It adds a C in superlative in these superlative forms. And then we move on to like, gern, lieber, liebst, am liebsten. That one just completely changes. So gern means like, lieber means to prefer, and am liebsten means to like the most. Then we have great, big, or tall, which is groß, größer, größt, am größten. So the funny one here is the superlative form. Typically when things end in an S, ST, D, or Z, they take that filler E. So if it followed the rules, it would be größest. But that's not how we say it in German. We just say größt. So that is the exception for groß. And then we move on to gut, besser, best, am besten. This is similar to English, good, better, best. And then much or a lot. That's viel, mehr, meist, am meisten. So much more, mehr, meist, most. So again, that's also similar to the English, but completely different from that regular positive adjective form. These rule breakers you're just going to have to memorize. I've provided online Quizlet flashcards for you to practice the rule breakers as well as practice forming regular comparative and superlative adjectives. What we are going to look at next are some phrases that we can use these comparative and superlative adjectives in, as well as how we can use positive adjectives to express phrases for comparison. Our first phrase is using the word than with a comparative form. So if we want to say something like the woman is nicer than the man, we would say die Frau ist netter als der Mann. Notice that the two things that I'm comparing are both in the nominative case there, die Frau and der Mann. All right, next example, we have the woman is nicer than I am. So this is similar. We have die Frau ist netter als ich, and typically in English we'll also often say the woman is nicer than me, but more correct would be the woman is nicer than I, and that is how we would write it in German as well, making them both nominative. Another phrase, nicht so, adjective wie, not as, adjective as. So if we wanted to, we could say like the bike is not as fast as the car, and we would say that like das Fahrrad ist nicht so schnell wie das Auto. And you can see that we don't use a comparative or a superlative form for this phrase for comparison. We can also say genauso adjective wie, which means just as adjective as. So if we want to say something like Mexico is just as hot as the Caribbean, Mexico ist genauso heiß wie die Karibik. And then we also have another phrase, immer, with the comparative form. When we use immer with the comparative form of our adjective, it's showing that something's becoming more and more of that comparative adjective. It's showing a progression of intensity. So if we say something like the weather is getting warmer and warmer in English, that would be das Wetter wird immer wärmer. So you just put an immer before your comparative form, and that just shows that progression of intensity. And this was our introduction to comparative and superlative and phrases for comparison.